Think about the last time something broke in your life. Maybe it was a leaky faucet, a cracked phone screen, a car making a noise it definitely wasn't making last week. Now think about what you did next. Did you immediately pull up a YouTube tutorial and spend 3 hours watching someone explain the difference between a compression fitting and a push to connect? Did you order the part before you'd even fully diagnosed the problem? Did you feel this strange, almost magnetic pull toward fixing it yourself, even when calling a professional would have taken 20 minutes and cost you less than your time was actually worth? If any of that sounds familiar, you're not alone, and you're not just handy. What's happening inside you when you refuse to outsource a problem is far more psychologically interesting than it looks on the surface. Because here's what people usually assume about people who fix things themselves. They assume it's about saving money, maybe a dash of stubbornness, a personality quirk. But research in behavioral psychology, self-determination theory, and even neuroscience tells a completely different story. And once you understand it, you'll see yourself and the people in your life who are like this in an entirely new light. Let's start with something called the IKEA effect. In 2011, psychologists Michael Norton, Daniel Mochon, and Dan Ariely ran a series of experiments where they had participants build simple IKEA furniture and then asked them to assign a value to what they'd made. Over and over again, people valued their own amateur creations almost as highly as identical professionally made versions. They loved their lopsided, slightly wobbly boxes, not because the boxes were good, they often weren't, but because they had made them. The act of creation injected the object with personal meaning that had nothing to do with objective quality. Now scale that up from a $30 IKEA box to your entire life. When you fix your own car, repair your own plumbing, or troubleshoot your own computer, you aren't just solving a problem, you're literally building a relationship with your own environment. You're telling yourself, at a level that goes below conscious language, I have agency here, I am not helpless. And that feeling, that sense of competence and control, is one of the most psychologically nourishing experiences a human being can have. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, two of the most important psychologists of the 20th century, spent decades building something called self-determination theory. At its heart, their theory argues that human beings have three core psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When those needs are met, we flourish. When they're chronically unmet, we wither. And here's the thing about people who fix things themselves. They are, often unconsciously, chasing the first two of those needs with a kind of fierce dedication. Every time they solve a problem with their own hands, they are filling their own tank. It's not stubbornness, it's self-care with a wrench. But there's another layer here, and this one gets a little more personal. Because for a lot of people, maybe for you, the compulsion to fix things yourself didn't just come from nowhere. It was learned, shaped. Sometimes it was modeled by a parent who never called a repairman, who treated helplessness as a moral failure, who took genuine pride in self-sufficiency. Sometimes it came from a childhood where you couldn't depend on adults to fix things, so you figured out how to do it yourself. You became the person who handled it, and that became your identity. There's a concept in psychology called the locus of control, first introduced by Julian Rotter in the 1950s. People with an internal locus of control believe that their outcomes are primarily determined by their own actions. People with an external locus of control believe they're mostly at the mercy of outside forces. And consistently, people who fix things themselves score heavily internal. They don't wait to be rescued, because deep down they don't fully believe rescue is coming, or they've decided not to need it. That distinction matters enormously, because the first version is a wound, and the second version is a superpower, and sometimes they're the same thing wearing different clothes. Here's where it gets genuinely fascinating, though. When you fix something yourself, your brain doesn't just register problem solved, it does something much more elaborate. The prefrontal cortex, your planning and problem-solving center, works in concert with the dopaminergic reward system, the same system involved in anticipating a good meal, falling in love, completing a creative project. The act of diagnosing a problem, forming a hypothesis, testing it, failing, adjusting, and finally succeeding fires a cascade of neurochemical rewards that a simple transaction, handing someone money and receiving a repaired thing, simply does not produce. You can't buy that feeling. You literally cannot purchase it, because the feeling comes from the process, not the outcome. And this is why so many fixers will confess, if you press them honestly, that they actually enjoy the problem more than the solution. The broken thing is interesting. The working thing is just fine. There's a reason why once someone learns to fix their own bikes, they start hoping their bike breaks. Not consciously, but somewhere in the back of the brain, there's a little voice that says, I want another puzzle. Now, is all of this entirely healthy? That's worth sitting with for a moment, because the same psychological architecture that makes someone wonderfully self-reliant can, at its extreme edges, become something more complicated. Asking for help can feel like defeat. Delegating can feel like loss of control. Admitting that someone else might be better at something can feel like a kind of identity threat, because if your competence is your identity, then your incompetence feels like annihilation. Some fixers find it genuinely difficult to receive help, even when they desperately need it. Some will labor for days on something a professional could resolve in an hour, not because they're irrational, but because the act of doing it themselves carries a psychological payoff that transcends efficiency. This is not a character flaw. It's just worth knowing about yourself.
There's also something quietly philosophical about the fixer's relationship to the world. In a culture that has become increasingly transactional, where almost everything can be outsourced, automated, delivered, or streamed, the person who insists on understanding how things work is making a kind of statement. Not necessarily a loud one, but a statement nonetheless. They are pushing back, gently or not so gently, against the passivity that modernity seems to encourage. They want to understand the mechanism. They want to know what's inside the black box. There's a word for this. They want to be literate, not just in language, but in the physical world around them. Matthew Crawford, a philosopher and mechanic, wrote beautifully about this in his book Shop Class as Soulcraft. He argued that working with your hands isn't a lesser form of intelligence, it's a deeply engaged, often more honest form of thinking than the abstract knowledge work our culture has come to prize. The plumber who diagnoses a hidden leak is doing something cognitively demanding and profoundly satisfying, and the person who learns to do that themselves is not just saving money. They are maintaining contact with reality in a way that most of modern life actively discourages. So if you're someone who always fixes things yourself, who watches the repair video before calling the shop, who would rather spend a weekend figuring something out than spend 20 minutes handing it off, here's what I want you to know. What you're doing is more than practical. It's psychological, neurological, even philosophical. You are meeting your own needs for autonomy and competence. You are keeping your brain engaged and rewarded. You are maintaining a relationship with the physical world that most people have quietly abandoned. And even when it costs you more time than it saves you money, the return you're getting isn't financial. It's deeper than that. The only real invitation here is to also extend some of that mechanical compassion inward. To know that asking for help sometimes is not a system failure, it's just another kind of problem solving. The wisest fixers know not just how to diagnose an external problem, but when to apply that same clear-eyed honesty to themselves. What kind of fixer are you? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious whether this resonated with you or whether you think I've missed something. And if this kind of deep dive into why we do the things we do is your thing, then you're already in the right place. Welcome.